Hey everybody, I'm Jim Zupel. My wife and I own Five Bridges Health and Fitness, and I'm here with John Brown, our registered dietitian at the club. And today, John and I are going to talk a little bit about blood pressure and the impact food can have on it, whether you have good blood pressure, high, low. And John, I guess kind of starting out, we really want to talk about, get a sense of what could someone do to improve their blood pressure, high or low? Just what are some of the things that people have in their control?
Yeah, high blood pressure is much more common. And if I had to give an elevator speech, the short story is less sodium, less processed foods, and more fruits and vegetables. Sodium tends to drive up blood pressure, and the potassium helps to kind of counteract that and lower the blood pressure. And the common problem we have is people just eat too many processed foods and not enough fruits and vegetables, so blood pressure can get out of balance even without being overweight or obese or any other risk factor like that. It sounds simple. Blood pressure is the amount of pressure inside your blood vessels, but that's influenced by the fluid, the nature of the fluid in your blood. The more complicated term is called viscosity. Describes how thick a liquid is. So you think of your blood is mostly water, but there's many things dissolved in it, like sugar and sodium. The more of any of those things you put into that concentration, the thicker the blood is, and the thicker the blood is, the more force is required to squeeze the blood. And think of the blood; they're the blood vessels. There are muscles that kind of guide those contractions. So if you had some kind of rubber tube, it would be much easier to squeeze a liquid through it if it was made of water versus think of like honey on the extreme end of things. That takes more pressure. Other things that influence blood pressure, if you have a blocked artery, any resistance inside an artery forces, it takes more pressure to get the blood through. But yeah, when we talk about blood pressure, we measure it. There's like 120/80 is typically how we think of that. The higher number is the one, that's like the maximum blood pressure. That's the pressure of your blood coming right out of the heart. And the lower number would be the lower end of things, where pressure, that's more of at the very end of of your like fingertips. Think of your more fine arteries having that lower blood pressure. So that's typically the range of the people.
And generally, when we hear about blood pressure in the news, the culprit always seems to be high blood pressure. That's what you hear people talking about. And I'm assuming people could have low blood pressure as well. What dictates one's pressure being high versus low?
A few things. In my world, there's a lot of nutrients at play. We talked a little bit about high blood pressure being caused by a lack of potassium and too much sodium typically. Low blood pressure can be caused by things like a vitamin B12 deficiency. Sometimes the hormones that regulate blood pressure can be off. There are various genetic factors at play there. And similar to like a low blood pressure or with high blood pressure, that's often caused by sodium. Sometimes people with a low blood pressure can actually benefit by having some more sodium. Another big thing to think about that I missed from the last question is when we talk about what is blood pressure. A big part of that is how much water is in the tubes. So the more water, the more pressure. Being dehydrated, if you have low blood pressure, is working against what you should do. So making sure at the end of the day, it's all about fluid balance when we talk about blood pressure.
So if our contention is that food is medicine and it impacts blood pressure, what are some of the sort of like superfoods to control blood pressure? And you mentioned that some of the culprits around like processed foods and those kinds of things, but if you were sitting here talking to people about healthy food that's going to help blood pressure, what might they be?
So in terms of the superfood world, bananas are a pretty high source of potassium. when people talk about potassium, I think they associate bananas with cramping and that kind of thing. So bananas are a big one. Things like kiwis, spinach, leafy greens, even a lot of nuts and seeds are fairly high in potassium. And there are many nutrients at play. It's we often reduce it to potassium, but like we mentioned with B12, we know magnesium has an effect on blood pressure. We've seen different other things like even stress is related to blood pressure. Not getting enough sleep, making sure you're active enough. So food can only support so much. We have to kind of look at the big picture, make sure there's not other irritating factors, but that's why in general it's more of whole foods in the form of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, even whole grains, things with fiber can kind of help. On that end, you want to think about if you have issues managing your blood sugar, if you're having like a high carbohydrate meal, it's processed carbs. If that's spiking your blood sugar, that's also going to spike, your blood pressure, because that at the end of the day is a concentration. So for that period, it's looking more, that blood sugar spike is going to cause transient increase in your blood pressure. So to manage that, something like a whole grain, add some protein. That protein and fiber, as well as fat, can help to kind of slow any response like that. At the end of the day, your body likes to stay within a tightly regulated system, and a lot of our processed food can kind of counter that. So just getting back to a more whole food form tends to be the roundabout answer to that question.
I think a lot of us, myself included, we're not always lining up for the leafy vegetables and all those kind of things in the natural foods. And so I know there's a whole world of supplements out there. In terms of natural supplements, are there things people can take along with their diet that are going to help them in this, regulating the blood pressure and keeping it within acceptable ranges?
Yeah, the magnesium is one that can help. That tends to be related to heart health and is a commonly deficient nutrient. Other things that can help, like omega-3s in the form of fish oil, tend to help. Those tend to have in opposition to saturated fats, which appear to be more sticky. We don't want those to stick to our arterial walls at all. We want a more of a, almost think of, how fish is kind of slimy. I think the omega-3 has a similar property at a smaller level. When we talk about inside our blood vessels, things tend to stick a little bit less. It's also anti-inflammatory. Other things that could help, beetroot juice. Beets beets do have nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. And when we talk about, what influences blood pressure, part of it's the size of the tube. The smaller the tube, the higher the pressure. Because nitric oxide is a vasodilator, it essentially makes the tube bigger, relieving some of the pressure. So that can kind of help on that end. There's a few herbal things that have been studied. Hawthorn's one, grapeseed extract. Those things tend to show a benefit to blood pressure, significantly, but not always very dramatic. And that's where, maybe using some of these in combination, you never want to supplement alone without giving an honest try with diet and lifestyle. Those are by far going to be the biggest things, managing your stress, getting enough sleep, being physically active. And that physical activity, in a sense, in the short term, you're training your blood pressure. You're essentially teaching your body how to handle high blood pressure. So other things that can be an issue, like arterial stiffness. You don't want your arteries to be too solid. So by exercising, you're getting a good blood flow and you're teaching your arteries how to be elastic, which is, you know, again, a healthy feature of blood vessels.
Nice. And, you know, one of the nice things is that if you're interested in learning more, you know, you can always go to the website, follow the link in some of our social media to our nutrition page. You can get a free consultation with John set up. In addition to that, we have, I think, 6 insurance companies that currently in some way, shape, or form are covering fees associated with that. I think if I have them right, it's Highmark, it's Capital Blue, it is Humana, it is Aetna, and I believe also United and Cigna as well.
Yep.
You know, so we have 6 different insurance companies that John has set it up where people are coming in now and getting these services, which are categorized as preventive in terms of our health, and getting everything covered. So we hope to see you on a future episode. Thanks for tuning in today, and food is medicine.